The young and the restless spoilers shock Cain Ashby stood under the golden chandelier of the Château de Varennes in Paris, his voice echoing with unshakable certainty as he finally declared what many had speculated but none dared to confirm. That he was Aristotle Dumas, the elusive billionaire and enigmatic puppeteer behind a cascade of mysterious power moves and corporate upheavals that had sent shockwaves through Genoa City and far beyond. There was no flinch in his posture, no crack in his tone. This wasn't just a confession. It was a calculated act of transformation, the shedding of the old Cain and the emergence of a darker, colder version of him, born of betrayal, pain, and long-buried ambition. But even as he basked in the reaction of the room, the hushed gasps, the subtle shifting of eyes filled with judgment, doubt, and even admiration, one man leaned back in his seat with a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Victor Newman. Always watching, always calculating, Victor didn't blink. Because unlike the others, Victor wasn't surprised. He had seen this coming long before Cain even began to toy with the idea of playing God in the corporate battlefield. And unlike Cain, Victor never played without a backup plan. In the silence that followed Cain's bold proclamation, Victor's eyes remained cold and still, a predator in the shadows. He allowed Cain a few moments of triumph, allowed the illusion of control to settle deeply into the man's psyche, because Victor understood the value of patience, of letting a man believe he was winning before turning the tide so sharply it shattered him. And so Victor simply nodded, almost in admiration, before rising slowly from his chair. "Interesting," was all he said, his voice low, deliberate, mocking. The crowd parted for him as he left the room, not out of fear, but because they sensed the shift, the kind of gravitational pull that always accompanied Victor Newman when he moved with intent. Cain, high on the adrenaline of his reveal, didn't see the trap being set. He didn't question why Victor left so calmly, nor did he consider what such calmness meant. And by the time the pieces began to shift, it was far too late. Victor had already acted. Long before the Dumas Gala in Paris, while Cain was meticulously weaving together his reemergence and crafting the grand reveal, Victor was working behind the scenes with the ruthless precision of a chess master. He had eyes in every direction, in London, Sydney, New York, and yes, even in the shadows of those not currently residing in Genoa City. Because Victor knew Cain better than Cain thought. He knew the man would eventually return, but not as Cain. No, he would return wearing a mask. And when a man puts on a mask, Victor makes it his mission to know what or who he's trying to protect underneath it. Which is why, weeks before the event in Paris, Victor had located Charlie and Matilda, the twins Cain shared with Lily, quietly living their lives away from the scandals of their parents' past. Victor didn't alert the press. He didn't make phone calls. He sent private security, confidential transport, and an invitation that bore no Newman signature. The children arrived in Paris believing they were being recruited for a youth entrepreneurship summit. And it was only after they landed that the curtain began to lift. A quiet dinner, private screening room, a file handed over to them with names, photos, documents that charted not only their father's descent into shadowy power plays but also the real danger they were now in, not from strangers, but from being pawns in the very game their father had chosen to play. And then came the moment Victor had planned meticulously, a simple photo, grainy, black and white, showing Charlie, their son, bound and held in an unknown location. The image was not real, not yet, a digital manipulation designed to trigger exactly what it did: terror. When Cain received that image, delivered silently to his phone during a break between speeches, his blood ran cold. His knees buckled. And for a man who had just declared himself the master of power and secrecy, his tears betrayed a deeper truth, that none of it mattered. Not the wealth, not the mask of Aristotle Dumas, not the empire he had quietly amassed. All of it shattered in an instant when he saw the fear in his son's eyes, or what he believed was real fear. In that moment, Victor's power crystallized. Cain had underestimated him. He had dared to think he could outmaneuver a man who had buried enemies stronger, faster, and more merciless than Cain would ever be. Lily stood nearby when Cain collapsed into a chair, gripping the phone like it was burning his hand. She took one look at the screen and the blood drained from her face. The children were supposed to be safe, untouched by the darkness their parents had danced with for years. That was the unspoken promise. That whatever paths they chose, their children would never be dragged into the depths with them. But now, staring at Charlie's terrified face, Lily turned on Victor with unrestrained fury. Her voice, usually controlled and elegant, cracked as she screamed his name across the ballroom, charging at him like a mother lioness whose cubs had been cornered. "You brought children into this? What kind of monster are you?" Victor didn't blink. "I brought reality into this," he replied coldly, not needing to raise his voice. Kane decided to play in the deep end. "I'm just making sure he remembers who controls the current." There was no apology in his voice, no hint of remorse. Just the calm conviction of a man who had built an empire by breaking those who mistook his silence for weakness. To the world, this was another Newman power move, calculated, controversial, but undeniably effective. To Lily, it was an unforgivable trespass. But even she knew that Kane had opened this door. He had lied, manipulated, and faked his identity for months, if not years. He had cut deals with dangerous people. He had erased his past and replaced it with mythology. He had sacrificed trust and legacy for power. And now that power had cost him something far more sacred, the innocence of his children. Charlie and Matilda, still unaware of the photographs sent to their father, were being watched closely by Victor's team. Not in malice, but in protection, in strategy. Because Victor wasn't interested in hurting them. He was interested in reminding Kane that love was always his weakness, that legacy built on deception would always collapse beneath the weight of consequence. And for Kane, that realization came too late. In the hours that followed, the press began circling. Rumors swirled. Some whispered that Dumas had been exposed. Others speculated that Victor had orchestrated the entire event to flush him out. And while Kane tried to regain control of the narrative, Victor was already 10 moves ahead, meeting with European regulators, cutting private deals with Dumas-affiliated investors, and preparing to dismantle Kane's empire, not with bullets but with contracts. Not with threats, but with truths so meticulously documented they would tear through Kane's public persona like fire through paper. Lily, caught between her love for her children and her bitter disgust at what Kane had become, found herself staring at a man she no longer recognized. This wasn't the father of her twins. This wasn't the man she had once risked everything to save. This was a ghost of ambition, willing to gamble with the only thing that had ever truly mattered, family. And so the game had changed, not because Kane lost, but because Victor revealed that the game had never truly been Kane's to begin with. Victor Newman, once again, had proven that in Genoa City, and far beyond it, power is not about money or even manipulation. It's about foresight. It's about understanding that everyone has a breaking point. And Kane, for all his swagger and secrets, had just reached his. The question now wasn't whether Victor would destroy him. It was whether Kane would find the strength to rise again, not as Aristotle Dumas, but as the man he once was. And whether, in doing so, he would finally understand that the true cost of becoming a legend is not what you gain, but what you lose along the way. Let me know if you'd like a continuation or spin-off, e.g., what Lily does next, or whether Charlie and Matilda fight back. The luxury train coursed through the French countryside like a serpent of secrets, every compartment humming with whispers, tension, and half-finished truths. Yet none of the decadence on board. The polished mahogany, the vintage champagne, the curated guest list of billionaires, politicians, and legacy tycoons could distract from the thunderstorm brewing in one private cabin. For in that sealed space, Victor Newman had delivered an ultimatum, not with rage, not with theatrics, but with the calm, ice-edged clarity of a man who had lived too long and seen too much to be shaken by games. He held the power, and everyone in that room knew it. Victor's words were simple, but they carried the weight of execution. "Kane," he said, his voice low but resonating, "you end this charade now. You get every single guest off this train and return to Genoa City quietly. No headlines. No stunts. No more plays for legacy. If you do that, Charlie lives. But if even one person gets hurt, if even one ego pushes back, your son dies. And I won't repeat myself." The silence that followed was suffocating. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lily's breath caught, her fingers clenched into fists at her sides as she turned to Kane, her voice barely a whisper but soaked with desperation. "Please, Kane," she said, her words trembling as her eyes burned with unshed tears. "Enough. Please just listen to him. I'm begging you. This has gone too far." Kane didn't speak. He couldn't. His mind was racing, shattering into 1,000 jagged thoughts. Victor had taken control of everything he had built. No, everything he had stolen. manipulated, fought to resurrect from the ashes of his past. The empire of Aristotle Dumas wasn't just about wealth, it was about finally becoming untouchable, about never having to bend a knee to anyone again. But in a single moment, Victor had reduced all of it to ash. And now Cain stood on the edge of ruin, not for himself, but for the only thing that still tethered him to humanity: his children. He looked down at the phone again, at the photo of Charlie. His son. Bound terrified. Whether it was real or not didn't matter anymore. The image had done its work. It pierced through the armor Cain had forged around himself, the cold, impersonal mask of Dumas that had protected him from guilt, shame, weakness. But nothing could shield a father from the sight of his child in danger. And Victor knew that. "You're bluffing," Cain finally said, though his voice was hollow. "You wouldn't actually kill a child. Not even you would go that far." Victor took a slow step forward. "You think I care what people think I would or wouldn't do?" he replied evenly. "Let me be very clear. I'm not bluffing. I'm done playing chess. I'm done tolerating chaos. You want to be the king of ashes? Fine. But if even one hair on that boy's head is harmed because you can't swallow your pride, that blood is on you. Not me." Lily's knees gave way and she fell into the seat beside Cain, her hand finding his in a desperate grip. "He's telling the truth," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You know he is. He doesn't need to hurt Charlie, he just needs you to believe he can. And that's enough." The room darkened as the train entered a tunnel, as if the world itself held its breath. Victor stood still, as unmoving and ancient as a mountain, while Cain felt his resolve crumble. The empire he had built was a lie. The name he wore was borrowed. And the people he had dragged into this. The guests, the allies, even the enemies, none of them mattered more than that one boy who still believed his father would protect him no matter what. Cain exhaled. Then slowly, painfully, he nodded. Victor turned to his assistant, gave a silent nod, and within moments a controlled announcement began echoing through the train, a logistical explanation, a fabricated mechanical malfunction, a change of plans. No one would suspect anything more. The passengers would be escorted off at the next stop under the guise of safety. And just like that, the curtain would fall on the illusion that had taken Cain years to build. He had lost. But Victor wasn't finished. As he turned to leave the compartment, he paused at the door, casting a long shadow over Cain and Lily. "You can come after me later," he said without turning around. "Hell, you can burn down half of Genoa trying to punish me if that makes you feel whole again. I'll be waiting. But if you cross the line again, I won't aim for your son. I'll aim for your legacy. And I promise, Cain, I will erase you so thoroughly your grandchildren will only know you from court records." And with that he was gone. The train emerged into sunlight again as the tunnel ended, but the light felt cold, sterile. Cain sat motionless, his eyes vacant, the weight of surrender pulling his shoulders down. Lily sat beside him, unable to speak, unable to look at the man who had once been her husband, her partner, her protector. Now just a ghost, broken and adrift. She didn't know whether to comfort him or leave him behind forever. By the time they reached the small countryside station, the guests were already boarding discreet convoys back to the city. Victor had arranged everything. Of course he had. He always did. No scandal, no trace, just silence. But even as the chaos aboard the train dissolved into controlled whispers, the consequences were only beginning to crystallize. Because Genoa City was no longer the place Cain remembered. While he had been masquerading across Europe, Victor had recalibrated his empire. The Newman children were splintered. The abbots were quietly regrouping. Chancellor Winters was bleeding power. And whispers were growing louder. Whispers of a new player entering the board, one whose identity was still hidden but whose influence could disrupt everything. Victor had forced Cain to retreat. But he had not defeated the hunger that burned in Cain's soul, the ache for vengeance, for restoration, for redemption. And as the sun began to set over the tracks stretching behind the luxury train, Cain made a silent vow that he would return to Genoa not as Aristotle Dumas, not as a phantom billionaire, but as a father who had lost everything, and who would stop at nothing to reclaim it. Because Victor had won the battle. But the war for Genoa City, that was just beginning. Would you like the next part to follow Cain's return to Genoa and how he regroups? Or should we shift focus to Victor's next moves? Or how Lily and the twins cope with the fallout?